I'm going to be introducing our speaker today. So welcome to the Building Social Capital through Community Development webinar. The reason why we're here today is to learn about this amazing social movement called Life.School.House. Jennifer reached out to me when she read a blog I wrote last year about relearning to be a citizen. And she said, this is exactly what the Life.School.House project is about. Jennifer DeCoste is the founder of Life.School.House, a project that focuses on drawing out the strengths within a neighborhood and sharing these in a folk school format in a barter-based community. We are so thrilled to have Jennifer join us on the call today. But before I pass it over to Jennifer, we'd like to play this video to help set the stage for the rest of the webinar.
In 2018, we were new to the neighborhood. We had a really simple idea. We wanted to open up our house as a learning community, a space where neighbors could come and meet each other, share their skills, like a modern-day folk school. Welcome to Life.School.House. In our first year, we offered space for more than 50 workshops with 35 different facilitators. What makes this project unique is that all of our classes are offered on a barter basis. All Life.School.House spaces are offered free of charge, and facilitators are compensated by the class participants who bring bartered items or gifts. No barriers to participation, all are welcome. The classes we offer often fill within minutes of posting. We have thousands of followers and we're busting at the seams. We need your help to keep supporting our community. We want to gather and share instruction manuals from our facilitators. We want to support our hosts with training to become even stronger community leaders. We are better off as a province because spaces like this exist in our communities. Join a class today at Life.School.House.
Welcome, Jennifer, and the space is all yours to inspire us.
Thanks very much, Heather. I'm really glad to be here today, and I must say that video was actually just completed by one of the members of our team here at Life.School.House as a gift back into the community, and every time I watch it, I think just reminds me how beautiful the barter community is that surrounds the Life.School.House project. So today we've been invited to share this model of non-traditional learning and community development. And on the surface, especially after watching a video like that, I would say that it looks very much like a folk school, classes where people are coming together to share and build local wisdom. But at its core, Life.School.House is actually a socially innovative project. It's an adaptation of a folk school model where the focus is actually on using that platform to address the growing sense of social isolation that exists in our communities, how we can feel better connected and build more resilient communities by way of coming together for shared learning experiences. So before we get too far into it, I think it's fair to talk a bit about Nova Scotia for those who are joining the call from anywhere in the world. Nova Scotia is a really tiny little spit of land that hangs on the edge to the east coast edge of Canada. And this work is really grounded in our place. It is a very resource dependent region of Canada. It's never been particularly affluent. We like to think of ourselves as relatively scrappy people. We're kind and known to be fairly cooperative in our approach to working together and living together. But Nova Scotia is also known as being relatively a closed community. It's difficult if you're not from here to really get to know people. It can be tricky to get invited into people's homes. So people are very nice on the streets, and that depth is something that can be a challenge for people to achieve in this region. We are experiencing a rise in immigration recently, and so projects where people can really spend time getting to know each other and in a deeper way is an important part of a thriving community in our neck of the woods. we're also navigating new relationships with the Indigenous people in Canada and having opportunities again to explore and really value the difference and how that shows up in our communities is a large part of the grounding of Life.School.House and our work. When asked to do this webinar, there were a couple of opportunities for people who were registering to ask questions, and some of them were really quite inspiring as I was building this presentation. So I will say that one of the questions that had come through was, how do you know if a community is ready? How do you measure readiness and willingness for community development projects? And really, in terms of setting the tone for this presentation, all I can say about something like that is that I was ready. I have 2 children, and I really wanted them to grow up engaged in their community and understanding that there's an ownership, a responsibility to building the kind of community that they want to live in themselves. And there was also a piece for my husband and I about wanting to understand how we could tread as lightly as possible on this land in unceded Mi'kmaq territory. And if we figured that if others were ready, then we would find them in this work, and we certainly have. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how this all kind of come together. I can figure out how to advance the slides. So fair to note that this idea, while it is an evolution or an adaptation of a folk school model, there is a strong history of folk schooling internationally. And I understand that there are a number of people on this call, many of whom are running their own versions of folk schools. So if we think about the giving credit where credit is due, I mean, humans have been sharing their skills for eons, millennia, and this is certainly not a new idea. We find ourselves to be grounded in the principles that were laid out, the tenets of folk education that were grounded in Grundtvigs philosophy and the Danish folk school tradition. So if anyone is interested in kind of researching back about the late 1700s, you were starting to see the idea of folk schooling becoming part of building up an active democracy. And that is still a large and present activity in Danish culture. It's linked very much to federal and national investment in social policy. And the presence of folk schools is really quite prominent in Denmark. Here, where I am in Nova Scotia, there was an attempt to adapt that model as something called the Antigonish movement that was kind of late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was very strong part of differently understanding adult education as a way to bring greater prosperity to individuals in rural communities. So it was a movement of microfinancing, a movement of adult education to advance opportunity and to start a cooperative movement that actually spread across North America. So that's a part of what informs us. And as well, we have really strong and inspirational partners in spaces like the Highlander Folk School, really inspired by things like John C. Campbell and how the craft movement has inspired folk schooling across the United States in particular. But things like at Highlander Folk School, where the ties into the civil rights movement and the social justice movement has found its space for folk schooling, has very much been a grounding principle of the design of our model at Life.School.House. So what is the model at Life.School.House? I mean, if you had the opportunity to see that video, for those who were present at the beginning of this call, functionally, what we're offering are folk school classes is shared out in free spaces that are all offered on a barter basis. So the use of residential spaces, for the most part, is gifted into the community. People will come, started off in my living room, took over my kitchen and the rest of my house, and is now spread outwards. But the idea was make use of the existing residential spaces that we have to invite neighbors in to share the skills that they have. Some of these skills may be things that people have learned the hard way. They could be something that they've learned from a grandparent or learned from university education or learned from YouTube. Any number of those skills that exist within community can be shared in a non-traditional, non-academic manner. That's kind of the foundation of the model. The thing that we hold kind of at our core is that what we do with the sharing of these skills is always done on a barter basis. The space is offered at no charge. The facilitators are brought into this community because of their willingness to share their skills for gifts or bartered items in exchange for that talent. And the reason why we feel so strongly about barter is that in our mind, we're attempting to neutralize the power dynamic between a teacher and a learner. Everybody is coming as equals into this circle kind of practice where the skills that are being shared are not given for free. They're given for an exchange of goods of some sort, or it could be something as simple as your grandmother's chocolate chip cookie recipe. But the people who are participating in those classes are gifting back into the community, which means that there is no divide between the teacher and the student. The other piece is that by making use of non-permanent space, we have very little overhead costs. So we don't have to be chasing funding to keep the lights on. It just has opened up a whole new realm of possibility, I would say, for this type of programming. And while it is non-permanent, our hosts, we call them the permanent hosts, are regularly offering that same space. So it becomes a bit of a community gathering place. And the feeling of connection is often grounded and rooted in that place as well. I guess the other piece that really stands out for me in our model is really its simplicity. It's not built to be something that is difficult to start or to try. The beauty lies in the fact that it is not overly complicated to do this type of work. And our next step has been to create a model that can be shared so that others can start up. We very quickly went, in our first year in my family's shared space, we hosted more than 50 classes in a year. Both my husband and I work full-time and have 2 kids. So it became very busy very quickly. And our thought had been that there's no way that we would ever do more programming in our house, but the call is obviously there. And so we were put out the call to others in the community to say, if anybody is interested in learning how to do this, we're here to help. And that became the next step in the evolution of the model, was to develop a network. So really what's unique about the model are those 3 factors, plus the fact that now there is a network that exists that includes everyone from the contribution of the community members themselves. So each person that is bringing their energy and their bravery into coming into a space like this, they do have a role to play. They are considered a key and an integral part of the model itself. The facilitators and their willingness to share just for the joy of sharing, that's a large part of the model. There's also a bravery in that facilitator putting themselves forward as a person that has talent to share. I hear often people will say things like, I'm not a teacher, or I'm not good enough to really share formally, but if it's just in your living room, that's okay. So essentially we're creating safe space for people to find their way into sharing their talent or their skill without the pressure of it being in an academic environment, or even something like a library where you're put into a program room and it seems very structured and formal. That can often be quite off-putting for people who have wonderful talents to share, but that seems too structured and too formalized. And yet they find themselves in a community like this, and in a small group environment, they're able to feel like they are valued and the skill that they have is appreciated. The hosts are the next component there. The hosts are the individuals who hold the space for the gathering. So the hosts are often the owners of the homes or the barns or the managers of shared community spaces. And they are, I was trying to explain it to somebody the other day, they're not hosts, they're hosts. They hold the space and the opportunity for that gathering to take place, and energetically they're kind of the orchestrators behind the scenes. They land the connection with the facilitators and make sure that the facilitators have everything they need to be successful, and they reach out and make connections with the people that are coming in to make sure that they feel bonded and connected. And that role of hosting is something we'll explore in a moment. My role has been to step into one of coordinator for this network, and we have a region here that is a contained unit, and those that are hosting within the region can now tap into this network of peer support and learning and training and development that's offered as part of their involvement with the Life.School.House project. So let's advance here. We've spent a fair amount of time, I think once we realized that it was bigger than just was larger than the small project we thought it was going to be. We wanted to understand a little bit more and set some goals for the work and the impact that it can have in our community. We have our eye on the long game, if I'm being honest. We're looking for some pretty significant impacts and seeing that there's an opportunity for the folk school to contribute, and the network of folk school to contribute to that increased sense of connectedness, that increased sense of well-being in our communities. We're looking forward to greater and seeing already greater civic participation, where people understand these small but really impactful ways that they can become more engaged in their building of the community that they want to live in. And at its core as well, there is a conversation that has started because of this work relating to that importance that we're placing on the hosting role, that's reframing our understanding of the importance of care and caretaking in our communities. There seem to be more and more conversations that I'm tapping into nationally and internationally, where we're thinking about that role of hosting and that role of caretaking as part of assisting with transitions to new models, be they economic or political or otherwise. Just safe spaces in our communities require that act of caretaking to form the strong bonds and connections that exist. And we do see that as part of the work that we're doing here. Ultimately, we're building an environment where there are new leadership that's rising up within our communities. These hosts who see themselves as community coordinators without a position title or without being actively involved, perhaps in some sort of political way or otherwise. They are just natural leaders who find themselves called to this type of practice. And what we've given is a framework where they can feel part of a network of support for them to explore that sense of leadership, that sense of personal leadership, and the contribution that they can make into their communities. We're also really interested from an asset-based community development perspective in how we're now identifying and leveraging the community assets that exist. So we have so many more facilitators now that we can tap into from all kinds of different socioeconomic groups and cultural groups and et cetera, that really are now finding this as a tool to become sharers of knowledge that they're holding, and our knowledge keepers to have access to a platform where that can be disseminated through the community has given a sense of a different kind of strength, I think, here in Nova Scotia. We are working pretty hard on capturing the narratives and love telling these stories. So if there's anybody on this call who would like to hear a little bit more about it, please do follow us on social media, because there's a lot of storytelling that's happening there. And in particular, one of the stories that we're hearing is that people never thought about making use of residential space as community spaces. And this is, I wouldn't say that it's new, but I think we're being reminded that these spaces exist and this is possible. So you're seeing a lot of communities pop up of co-living and intentional communities that make use of the space in this kind of way. So we're tapping into that, but calling it as an opportunity to not be tied to that funding chase to keep the lights on and to keep the room warm. We already have access to those spaces within the homes and spaces of these hosts that are so generous with their use of what they have, the resources and tools they have available to them. I've traveled a little bit here recently and been involved in a fair amount of conversations about the international movement and the growth of the folk school movement. It seems tied to a bit of a resurgence. Perhaps it's because of where we're at in different countries and spaces, looking for leadership from different positions in society. And so the Life.School.House movement is interested in contributing to conversations about how we define the folk school movement and what other ways of thinking about folk schooling might help us as we transition into new ways in the world. So the nuts and bolts of the thing that we're doing. It certainly started off as a call to join and participate in small group classes. Small is key. One of the things that we noted was that if the class sizes are 6, 8, 10, 12 people tops, you will see people connecting with each other more intimately. And in larger size groups, people start to fraction off into smaller group conversations. So we intentionally keep the class size of learners small. And yet when we first were hosting classes, it was something as simple as hanging up posters in local cafes and libraries and saying, we're going to try this thing. My first class was Fermentation 101. Anybody want to come and check this out? I think we had 3 people who showed up, 3 very brave souls who kind of knocked on the front door and said, am I in the right place? What we experienced was a bit unexpected, was that within, I think, our 4th class, we filled that class, and then everyone after that has been filled to a wait list. So I think there was a sense of readiness for this, and perhaps a bit of bravery in the community, because people were really feeling quite isolated. We have very long winters here. It gets very dark quite early. Anything that can draw people out together to connect or reconnect was something that people were looking for. So we quickly evolved into a space where we don't seek out facilitators. We are receiving volunteer facilitator offers every day on a daily basis. People are saying, just heard about this, love this idea, not sure if I'm good enough, but I would love to share, my grandmother's canning recipes, or I live, in the community, and I whittle, and I would love to show others if any of you think people might be interested. So we have done any number of classes. Basically, it's just whatever the talents exist in the neighborhood. We've done everything from leather bookbinding to photography classes. We have an improv class tonight. 3 days ago, we had 7 sewing machines in my living room. So the idea is that those small group classes are still at the core of what we're doing. The maker swaps, if anybody's been on our website or on our social media, you'll see that these are popping up all over the place as well. The foundational principles of a maker swap are bring what you can and take what you need. That is because the people who have participated in these classes tend to be really talented individuals who, let's say you make scarves. This came from a maker swap. If you make scarves, everyone in your family has a scarf, all of your friends have a scarf, but you still just really love making scarves. And yet, if you could bring a couple of scarves to a maker swap and trade that for sourdough bread or some Japanese language lessons, or any number of things might show up at a maker swap. But the idea is that it needs to be something that you can, a knowledge that you hold, or something that you've made with your hands that you can exchange with another person. One of the things I found most interesting when we launched these maker swaps was that it is managed by the community. So there is very few rules that we put around in terms of structure of those swaps. People will come in, everything goes on a common table. There's never, it's not, if you bring 2 things, take 2 things, that's not the point. The idea is that each person decides how much they take to be fair to the community and fair to themselves. And it has really just created a lovely tone on its own that hasn't required any type of policing or management of any way. And I have, even within the first kind of 2 or 3 of those types of swaps, found that anyone associated with Life.School.House very much plays a background role to just set it up, and the community will organize around it. So that's kind of the key pieces of our organization of it. I will say that in terms of a safety point, with those small group classes, we never have a host. There's always 2 contributors. So there's always a host and a facilitator in every gathering. So neither the host nor the facilitator is ever alone. And the host will never also be a facilitator. We've decided or discovered through this that the act of hosting is a job in and of itself that takes the energy, probably sometimes more energy than you'd expect, and that needs to be held as a separate role, and that the act of facilitation is a role where you need to stay focused on what it is that you're there to share. So for safety and for being fair to these volunteer contributors, we always pair them up so that there's that sharing that happens there. There was a question from the group about quality control. I think it was something along the lines of, how do you ensure that if people are just sharing their skills, that there's any sort of quality to the skill that they're sharing? And essentially the way that the model is set up is that it's important that the hosts vet the facilitators in conversation in advance, just to make sure that they have what they need and that they've thought through how they're going to present, because there is a skill to facilitation and sharing, and the hosts are able to work that through with the facilitators in advance, and they'll know fairly quickly if that person is going to need some extra support in the classroom or in the school, in the around the kitchen table functionally. But essentially we're sharing and we're not teaching. So whatever shows up as a contribution to the community is good. And it's better than not doing this. So if somebody wants to come and learn something like knitting socks, and they're being introduced to an idea, they're in a room full of people where they can ask questions, and that's the point. That's good enough for us, I'd say. If I think back over classes that speak to how this is so much more than just a class, you think of like going out to do a paint night or any type of class that you might get in a community center. You might sit next to somebody, you might talk to them just because you're sitting next to each other, but that's not the point of why you're gathering. But at the Life.School.House and with the model that we've developed, that actually is the point. The connection between the humans that are in that space together is the point of what we're doing. And one class that stands out for me in the last year or so, we had a woman who came and taught a class on henna tattooing and mehndi, but also kind of the symbology of it and cultural use of henna tattooing, and it was really quite lovely. So everyone's kind of drawing their designs and they were doodling on each other and just kind of having a lovely time around the kitchen table. But then Vanita said, she kind of leaned in and asked, is there anything you would ever have wanted to ask an Indian woman but you were too afraid to say out loud? And my goodness, somebody from the group, there was probably only 6-7 women at the table, someone said, you know what, I would love it if you could explain arranged marriages, because it's not something that I've grown up with. It's not something I know much about, and I'd love to know more from your perspective. So this woman in her mid-30s who's been in arranged marriage for many years sat and told her story, and then one by one, each of the women around the table were talking about their marriage and what it looked like and how their parents were or were not involved. And it was just an opportunity to broach those kinds of subjects in a safe space where we can learn more about each other and get into deeper relationship. And it might look different in wherever this pops up anywhere else in the world, but here in Nova Scotia, in terms of where we're at in our journey, those opportunities for cross-pollination and just hearing ask out of genuinity and as opposed to being fearful or not asking the question, making up what assumptions you may make up to compensate for that lack of knowledge. It was just a really beautiful opportunity, and that kind of thing happens all the time in these kinds of spaces. So that's definitely something that stands out for me. We're here today to kind of talk about the things that we've learned in our journey, because it's been not quite 2 years. Our second birthday will be on the 15th of February, which we will hopefully be able to celebrate with a little bit of cake. But what we've learned about working with our community is that there is actual intentional outreach. If you want to see multi-gender participation in classes or multicultural participation in classes, multi-generational participation in classes, there is a need to do intentional outreach into various community groups to ensure that those different people, that all people feel that they are welcome in this kind of space. And one of the ways that we've done that is that we've offered diversity in the topics of classes that we're offering. And we have connected with groups like, we have the Immigrant Settlement Services Association here in Nova Scotia, and to do that kind of welcome, to go to their space to explain what it is that we're up to and to make sure that they feel welcome and drawn into what it is that we're trying to do, has created an opportunity for that type of diversity in our community. We engaged in a developmental evaluation about 6 to 9 months ago. And the reason was that we were starting to realize that there was a lot more happening than we were tracking. And we wanted to go a little bit deeper into the secret sauce. And one of the things that I found most interesting is that when we were asking something simple like, why are they coming? we knew it wasn't about folk school classes, but this gave us a bit of data to look at. Realistically, people were coming into these spaces because they were looking for a greater sense of enjoyment or happiness in their community or in their life. They were coming for creativity and ideas sharing, and a really high percentage were looking to meet new people and feel like there is a community that they're a part of, that there's a social connection, that they have friends. And I don't think we realized quite how high that would be ranked, how high these pieces on the scale that we were surveying, how high those would come out. It's led us to think a lot about what it takes to be a successful host, because we are very strongly basing this work in the act of hosting, not necessarily facilitation, but that the role of the hosts in creating that tie, that connection and community is fundamental and core to the work, especially if we look at those results that we're aiming for or already achieving. We needed to have some data around what it took to be a successful host. One of the things that we'd identified was that like I said earlier, it's not a jazz hands approach to hosting. You're not standing in front of it, and it's not a lot of pomp and circumstance. It's very much a behind the scenes caretaking role where there's a sense of connection created and held, protected, nurtured by that role of the host. There's also something where the successful hosts that we've worked with seem to have hosting as an innate part of who they are. We're working to get some more data on that, to be honest, but there's generally a feeling that these are the kinds of people who tend to lean into different volunteer opportunities where they are providing that kind of caretaking. Because I know this will be a question that's asked. Yes, we are mainly seeing that this is a role played by women or female identifying individuals, and yet we do have some men and male gendered individuals that are really leading with a lot of feminine energy as well. So that's something that we are exploring, is why there is that strong pull from feminine energy to participate in the act of hosting. So another conversation perhaps for another time for anyone else who is doing that type of research. The other thing that we'd identified is that it's a lot easier to host if there's a strong values alignment with things like the barter economy. So people who are already connected with or supporting conversations about fair and inclusive economies, this is something that they get without a lot of support or coaching required. So that is a model that we've been exploring, because we're now kind of moving into supporting new hosts, and we wanted to be able to explain what are the factors, or be able to identify when people express interest in joining us as a host of the Life.School.House project here in Nova Scotia, what the success factors are. Where that's led us to is ideally a relatively seamless startup. We're still in a phase of preparing a lot of the materials to make it as easy as possible, but we have created a hosting guide. It's available on our website. It's free for download. It's kind of just a summary of the pieces that we've learned that we're happy to share. There's also contained now within this pilot that we're running here in Nova Scotia, a model that can be replicated if there are regions that want to support a network of Life.School.Houses anywhere else in the world, where we align with a peer support program. There's a buddy system for startups. We use personal improvement kind of process conversations where, safe place to ask those questions when you're in that startup phase, of people who've definitely been there and probably had all those questions as well at one point. We do offer training. We're just in the midst of designing a new, more coordinated approach to the training programs that we offer, but a fair amount of it is related to what you're going to need before you get started. Some of the key bits, like mental health first aid training, is certainly one of those pieces that we feel is really strong for our hosts, and all kinds of different hosting techniques and strong a deepening of an understanding of community development principles and that kind of thing, but an ongoing access to training that we offer on an online basis to all of our hosts, because they're scattered all over a geographic area. But we meet each month and we pick a learning topic, and they're going through those together, and they're often led by people within the group as well. It's not necessarily pushed out. It's something that is brought to the group by any number of the hosts. So we kind of have the tools of the trade that are coming together, how to use Eventbrite to post your events, and how to, you know, there's space available on our website and space in our social media platforms where new hosts can set up, make use of the logos and presentations and things that we have. One of the other questions that I had heard in advance of this webinar, somebody said, when you're introducing a new idea to a community, how have you found best to plant the seed which can grow into a viable change? So how have you found best to plant the seed? Honestly, I would say that our early adopters of this model have been the deal breaker for our success. So those who naturally gravitated to this idea and said, yes, crazy person who's dancing on the side of the hill, I will dance beside you. If you've seen that YouTube video, you know what I'm talking about. We had a couple of people who stepped forward and they said, I get this, and my community 3 hours away also needs this, and let's learn together and figure out how to do this. And having access to those early adopters who are brave and willing to try made for a pretty significant it made it possible for us to have the deepening of the change movement that we feel like we're a part of. I'd be remiss in saying that if it wasn't for my team at Inspiring Communities here in Nova Scotia as well, that gave me the space to link what I'm doing here with the work that we're doing on a larger scale across Nova Scotia. Without their support and encouragement, it would have been really tricky to do as much as we've done this year as well. So I think working with really strong teams who understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish, finding your early adopters in teams, or rather with individuals in your region, those are the things that are going to give you the courage and the energy to keep moving forward. There were a couple of people pre the workshop who were asking about measurements and how do you know that you're having impact? And I'm happy to have longer conversation about this because we really have just begun our own process of understanding the impact and how to measure impact. But like I said, we did engage in a developmental evaluation that lasted a couple of months and just went through understanding kind of what the long-term outcome, like how close we were getting to the longer term goals and what our trajectory was looking like so that we could have some data to measure against. We looked at a number of different factors, but functionally we were trying to understand, like, is this actually developing a network? Is it a diverse network? Is it a social connection? Are people feeling stronger social connections? Are they feeling like they have enough support from the community to be effective facilitators, to be effective hosts, to grow the practice outside of the Life.School.House and into other areas of their community lives? Like, is this something that's actually building up groups of people who then can go out and have greater and deeper impact? And we were looking at kind of the cross section of the participant experience. So a lot of people will come in light touch, like join a maker swap or come to a class. And then how does that evolve and actually land on more active and participatory citizenship? What does that actually look like? So we've got some tools that we share out with anybody who's interested in learning more about launching something like this where you live. We would suggest that, you know what, asking a couple questions once things get started will help you pivot as you go and understand a little bit more about how to. And some of those resources are available in that guidebook, which I've put on this slide here. I think that's a hyperlink, but if it is not, we'll make sure that you get the hyperlink. It's just available on our website and it gives some insight into what we were thinking about evaluation. We're really fortunate in Canada to have a baseline of data that we can draw from as well with the Canadian Index of Wellbeing. And then there are also other indices that we've been using to measure our impact against so that we can understand kind of what the ultimate outcomes are and what the indirect and more direct outcomes are that are happening, so that when we look at success measurements, that we can measure it against existing data, which is really helpful. And that is what we have access to in Canada. I'm not sure what might be available where you are, but I would say that access to baseline data is certainly very helpful in this type of research. So kind of a key bit here, but like I said, over and again, the hosts themselves are the lifeblood of the work that we're doing here in Nova Scotia and have become the differentiating factor between a Life.School.House approach to community development by way of folk schooling that is unique as far as I can tell anywhere in the world. That there are lots of different communities that are deepening and understanding and really supporting and promoting the importance of hosting. And we've brought that into this model because we feel that there's an actual role there of creating the conditions that are necessary to get a community to a place where it's really thriving and connected and strong. And so far in our piece of work, that's really been the act of hosting. So you'll see a lot of the writings and things that we'll share out via our website and after this webinar. They are talking very specifically about the hosting component being one of our significant success factors. So for those who were looking for more information about how to get involved, I should give a shout out to my friend Ashley. She's the co-executive director at the Highlander Folk School. Not sure if she's on this call, but we had a wonderful chat last week or the week before, and what she just gave me some words for something I was feeling in my gut about functionally, we just would love to see 1 million flowers blooming. So if this is a model that can be shared for anybody else's success anywhere in the world, that's what I'm drawn to with this piece of work. And your success will build anywhere in any application of this kind of idea anywhere in the world will build a greater success for the world that I want to live in. So any way that we can be helpful, that exists, and we want to share what we have learned freely with the hope in keeping with that barter philosophy, that there'll be an exchange back where you share your learning and you share your journey, you share the resources or tools that you have access to that can actually strengthen the community. And that's how we plan to keep this movement rolling. So we have some support for those who are interested in becoming the regional hosts. To me, that's the role that I'm playing right now in our pilot here in Nova Scotia, where there's actually a coordinator's position to build up the network of people who are doing this work in a designated region. You're hosting the hosts, and it's extremely rewarding and a unique piece of work in and of itself. So we have some tools and resources to support mainly those regional hosts. Those who have been involved, those early adopters and those supportive team that we have here are also really interested in participating as peer coaches for those who want to get started. So you can tap into our community in that way. They want to be able to share on a one-on-one basis or in group conversations about how to get started and how to survive some of the hurdles, let's say. We have existing resources. We're working on like I said, the training programs, a lot of which will be online and those types of things. So what we would say is reach out. It's not hard to find online, and I'm sure there'll be some things going out after this webinar where you can tap into some of the tools and things that we have to keep things moving. One of the things that is happening that people might be interested in is that there are several communities of practice popping up all over the world for people who are thinking about folk schooling in particular. And it shows up differently in every country, and it shows up differently when you're talking about folk schooling kind of internationally, because I've met people who are doing folk schooling in Burma and Myanmar, and how that looks like in a community where democracy is fledgling at best, shows up very differently from how it's going to be in Denmark, for instance, or how it is in Canada, or how it would be in Australia. But there are conversations that were held. There's an international summit of folk schools that was held in September 2019 that's led to a community kind of international community conversations about what an internationals alliance could possibly look like. So if that's something you want to know more about, you can certainly send me an email or search it up online. And if in the United States and kind of expanding to include North America, the Folk School Alliance exists as a tremendous resource for people who are doing this work here within North America. But specifically for those who are joining this call from Canada, this is not an active community of practice in Canada. I've done a fair amount of research and have spoke to a lot of scholars who have been doing research on the idea of folk schooling in Canada, and it's just in this model and in this iteration, it's new, and there are not a lot of ongoing conversations about what we want a Canadian approach to folk schooling, what kind of what our tiebacks are and what our learning and our impact could be. So there's a handful of us who are doing a call out to anybody who'd like to participate in a Canadian community of practice to help design what makes folk schooling unique in Canada and how we can contribute to the shared global practice. So that's a call that's coming up via Zoom on the 19th of February. It's going to be at 3 o'clock Central Time. So I think that's the tail end for me, but I know that we've been seeing a number of questions coming through, and Heather's back to help me with that. Do we want to maybe answer some of these questions, Heather?
Yes, but I want to just go over the amazing responses that we got for those 3 questions. And so on the call, we have across Canada, from British Columbia up to Yukon and all the way to Newfoundland. So welcome, Canadians. And we also have from the UK, and we have our friends from the South in the US. And I just want to point out there's somebody from Miami and Mexico. So if you can send some warmth up here, I'd appreciate it. I can feel it just saying the 2 names.
And Alaska. Welcome,
and Alaska.
Colleen.
Yeah, yeah.
Tip to tip.
Education, government, not-for-profit, and community sectors, from what I can see. And I just want to point out the words. So the 3 words for social isolation: frustrated, agonizing, affects everybody from the age of 0 all the way to 100. Lonely, invisible, unimportant, unwanted, not understanding me, distrust, hopeless, remote. And then there's like the opposite words for the ideal community. So connected to land, healthy, kindness, joy, sharing, helping each other, having a purpose, music, craft, poetry, resilience, opportunity, welcoming, engaged, accepting. And it's just so inspiring to hear that, we've got this long list of words about isolation, but we also know what we need to do in our communities to make them welcoming. So I just wanted to highlight that. And there's lots in there, and I kind of just clumped them together, but I hope everyone had a chance to read everyone's answers. It's really great. So I'm going to jump into some questions here. So we have quite a few on the call from very remote areas and rural areas. So how can Life.School.House be implemented in kind of the city, urban versus rural area? And I think we have somebody on the call who can help us with that, Tara?
Yeah, we'll see if Tara can pop in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. We can. Hi. Tara's one of our hosts of the Life.School.House in a pretty rural community here in Nova Scotia. Did you have some thoughts on the difference between kind of urban and rural folk schools, Tara?
Yeah, what I'm seeing in my area and what I'm called to be doing is actually offering daytime workshops. I think we have a fair amount of people that are home during the day, that that social isolation, that maybe they're not working for whatever reasons, whether that's disability, PTSD, maybe they're retired or they're stay at home. We also have a lot of people that are DIYers and homesteaders. So there's a lot of flexibility for people to come out to workshops during the day. And also just space-wise, I've got a very large barn that I'm using to host our workshops in, and I have 5 acres of gardens and fire pits. So it just really diversifies the different types of learning that we can do here that are unique from the city experiences and city classes.
Yeah, you should share about your herb walks.
Yeah, I've hosted herb walks here, so I've had people come and we've been able to just go through everything, and I've had people bring their journals so that they can actually pick the plants that we're talking about, put them in their journal and write down the names of them, the uses, and how they can be either used for eating or for medicinal purposes, talking about tinctures and infused oils. Yeah, so many different options that we can do here in a rural setting that I feel very blessed to be able to share. And I think part of why I'm so drawn to be doing this is that it is rural, and we have such a beautiful space here that I don't like to leave my home. So I like to be able to invite people here to share the beauty, and with so many people that really within a 10-15 minute drive, we can pull in quite a few people that we're still, they're not city folk or town folk. And so people are just looking for things to do during the day, and it's a whole different crew and experience that I've been just so blessed to be a part of through Jennifer and this the learning opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. I would say, so I live right downtown. We bought this house to try this project, and it has a bus stop at my driveway. So we're kind of in the thick of an urban environment. And so to counter kind of what Tara was saying is that I thought when we started it here that this was something that was experienced differently or uniquely by people in urban settings, that sense of isolation and that loneliness. And I've come to realize with work that Tara is doing and a number of other hosts that are in much more rural locations is that it's not this utopic, super connected and interdependent community in rural living that I thought it was. And there is a lot of parallels, I feel, to that sense of isolation that we're feeling in cities with what is being experienced in those rural communities. So it shows up differently. Tara can do things that that we wouldn't necessarily be called to do in the city. But that could go right back to the beauty of this model is the simplicity of the model. The idea is that you can take it and make it whatever your community needs it to be, and those leaders in community will be able to tap into kind of what is needed and how to do it differently in order to reach the people where they are and speak their language and meet the people, make the space the way that it needs to be. It makes sense to come into my house and grab a cup of tea in the kitchen and join in the living room, but we've had other communities where it makes more sense to meet at the community center down by the wharf. And that is a draw to their community, is to make use of that space that was built up by the community for the community and then completely underutilized. So the simplicity of the model allows for it to be adapted and used by contributing members like Tara in a way that makes sense for the community.
Mm-hmm. This kind of leads into the next question, and there's been quite a few questions about it, about what there are kind of two types of this question. One is, what resources do you need to get started? But there's also another question about the resources of the actual session. So if you needed paints and canvas and all, who's responsible for that? So, it's all kind of one question. What resources do you need to get started and to do the session?
Well, it's interesting because everybody has heard that expression, you live within your means, right? So for some reason, if you happen to make a little bit more money, you still never have enough money. And we had $3, I think, when we started this initiative. I honestly think it was about, $3 to say, let's see what we can do. So I mentioned my first workshop was fermentation. We talked about brewing kombucha. For anybody who wants to, come on out. Peeling off scobies and sending everybody home with the tools they needed to get started in their own brewing of kombucha cost me nothing. So what we did at the very beginning of our workshops was start with the things that we had access to. And very quickly we were able to kind of, as the community grew, somebody had offered to come and do a salsa making class, and therefore we needed mason jars. And our $3 would run out very quickly if we were buying mason jars for everybody. And we put out a note, and there was a day where 200 mason jars showed up in my driveway because they had been collecting dust in someone's basement. It had been their aunt's jars and their mom's jars, and these assets exist within community. And if we ask to make use of them in this way, it's been really surprising to me how much is made available to us to do this kind of work, simply by asking and by being creative. So when we do cooking classes, for instance, we have people, friends that I've met through this work who are new from India, and they have taught a couple of really phenomenal Indian cooking classes. If everybody is assigned, every participant who's coming can bring one ingredient for the for the meal, and then we're all sitting down and sharing it together. You bring 1 can of coconut milk and this person brings a chicken breast and these people bring 3 onions. It's totally possible. It's totally possible to do a lot with the resources that we have access to in a community if you think creatively about how to get at them.
Yeah, that's great. And Russ has lots of great questions. I'm going to pick one of his questions, and it's about the type of scale. So is it better to start off as a residential street, apartment building, go neighborhood, region? What would you suggest?
So that's interesting. I've heard, I've seen a couple of questions come in, I think like 30 emails over the last few minutes. It seems to be popping up, but a lot of, because I can't see the chat box, but the emails that people are sending in are often on that same subject. It seems to be like, hey, I live in this giant condo building, and curious about getting this started. It's funny because I had some students from Mexico a couple years ago who were studying at a local university and invited us in to talk, and they were blown away. They're like, we live in Mexico City. The idea of opening your front door to just whoever will show up, like, I cannot even fathom how that would happen. Like, it's just not culturally appropriate. It's not where we're at. It's not possible. And so we were having a conversation about, like, how is that ever going to change if you don't just try? Do you think you could find 3 or 4 people that might be interested in coming in that you could invite strategically that could come in? And so I've stayed in touch, and they went home, and the idea of trying with 3 or 4 people to 3 or 4 other people made more sense for them within their building in Mexico City. So it makes me think that there isn't any ideal way to start, but it's going to be what makes the most sense for where you are. With our space, we kind of just opened it up to a municipality. We're working within the framework of kind of a regional municipality. Anyone is welcome to kind of come in from the city, and it has kind of concentrated around, we don't have large, we're a pretty rural urban center. There aren't a lot of large buildings, but I would say that it can start up in however you define your community. If you define it by your municipality, if you define it by your neighborhood, based on our experience, it will evolve relatively quickly to others taking it into neighboring neighborhoods and kind of expanding out that way. So start anywhere, start small, give it a go.
Start with what you have and build from there.
Call me if you need help.
So I'm just recognizing the time, and there's a lot of questions. So what we will promise to do is we will take your questions and we will work with Jennifer to provide some short answers and resources. But there's also that session coming up where you're going to dive a bit deeper. Some of the questions are about, mitigating risk and safety and all of that. And I think that's really the dive deep piece that is going to happen and can happen on the next call, but we will do that. But I do have one last, because a lot of this came up about, how do you locate the talents? How do you locate the resources? How do you locate these hosts? And I really do think that the asset-based community development principle of having conversations and listening is really the underlying principal foundation of what you're doing, Jennifer. Because if you listen and you hear somebody has, quilting skills, and you hear somebody who can garden and who can do the fermenting, and you then become the connector and you can be able to connect. And so having conversations and listening with your community will be a great start to implementing this in your neighborhood. So on that, I want to thank Jennifer very much for this. I am really excited. I can't stop talking about this and sharing this story. But I want to just keep going on. Hannah, if you can go, we have some other great opportunities for you. So if you're into building community and you're into asset-based community development, which really this is building on, and the theory of asset-based community development, we just launched our amazing event. I have loved these events. They're held in the community. We're going to be at Fanshawe College, and we are going to bring 350 people from across Canada and the US together to really dive deep and celebrate the work that we're doing around asset-based community development and actually evaluating the impact of our work. And so have a look at it. We've got John McKnight's coming and Jim Deers and some other amazing keynotes and people. We've got 4 master classes and 8 workshops. So it's a really great opportunity to dive deep and learn more. And then we have some other webinars, which you might find useful in the work you're doing. We're going to be talking with Lydia and from the Vancouver Foundation. They have done an amazing work on community engagement and understanding loneliness and how to connect citizens. And so she's going to talk about the work that they have been doing. And then we have another one, and this came out from the event we had, the asset-based community development event we had in Edmonton. And we had a workshop on ABCD and the Indigenous principles, and a lot of excitement came from that. And Lori was one of the speakers at that event. And so she's going to come on and we're going to talk about the principles of ABCD and how they connect with the traditional values. But then we're also going to explore the urban Indigenous reality and provide insight on how to do this. So it's going to be really amazing. And then we just launched calling all Canadian youth photographers to come and participate in a photography competition. It's for anybody under 30. We want them to capture photos of what they like about their community. And then what their community will look like 10 years from now. And we've got prizes, and we're just trying to really engage the youth in our community. So thank you, everybody. We have recorded this. We will be sending out a post email with all of this and the answers to the questions that we didn't get to. I do apologize. And, feel free to email Jennifer or myself if you have any feedback or any other questions about what we talked about. And I just want you to have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much.